exist. It will exist in approximately 60 days. It will appear on a piece of paper mailed to your home. It will sit in the middle of a table most people never fully read, the utility bill, between the base rate and the total due. It will be a number you have never seen before on that document. And when you see it, you will understand, in a way that no press conference, no cable news panel, no presidential speech has been able to make you understand exactly what this trade war is costing you. The number has a name. It is called the Sovereign Energy Premium. It was created this morning. It was activated at 5:47 a.m. Eastern Time by a 9-paragraph regulatory directive from the Canadian Ministry of Natural Resources. And it will grow automatically, mechanically, proportionally with every tariff Donald Trump imposes on Canada. 25% tariff on Canadian goods. Your electricity costs 25% more. 50% tariff on Canadian steel. Your electricity costs 50% more. 100% tariff threat. Your electricity bill doubles. This is not a metaphor. This is not an abstraction. This is the billing architecture of the most sophisticated economic countermeasure ever deployed against the United States of America. Not by China, not by Russia, by Canada, by the country that for 50 years sent its electricity south through transmission lines built on the assumption of permanent friendship, and that assumption, this morning, has been retired. Remember that number when it arrives. Because the story of how it got there is the story of an administration that was warned, that refused to listen, and that handed a former central banker the political justification to do something no Canadian Prime Minister has ever done: turn the lights into a weapon. This is February 25th, 2026. As of 5:47 this morning, the Sovereign Energy Premium is active across all Canadian electricity exports to the United States. 12 states. 68 million Americans. A combined economy of $6.2 trillion, powered in part by water falling over Canadian dams that, as of this morning, carry a surcharge. Wall Street opened in freefall. Emergency sessions are underway in state capitals across the Northeast and Midwest. The White House, according to multiple sources, is dealing with a situation that nobody in the building modeled, because nobody in the building read the document that warned them it was coming. That document had a red cover sheet. It is sitting somewhere in the West Wing right now, unread. Here is the architecture of what just happened, not the politics, the mechanics. Because to understand why this is unprecedented, you need to understand the engineering of what Carney built. The Canada Energy Security Act passed through Parliament 6 months ago with almost zero American media coverage. Grants the Canadian federal government emergency authority over all cross-border energy exports when the bilateral trade environment has deteriorated to a degree that threatens Canadian economic sovereignty. Those are the statutory words. Trump spent 6 months providing the evidence that those conditions were met. He did it publicly, on Truth Social, at rallies, in executive orders. He built Carney's legal case for him, one tariff at a time. This morning, Carney filed the case. The Sovereign Energy Premium is a variable rate surcharge, and the variable it tracks is Trump's own behavior. Every tariff percentage point Trump applies to Canadian goods translates directly and automatically into an equivalent percentage point surcharge on every kilowatt hour of Canadian electricity flowing south. Let's be clear about what makes this different from every trade retaliation in modern history. Standard trade retaliation targets industries. You tariff our steel, we tariff your bourbon. You tariff our lumber, we tariff your soybeans. The damage lands on producers, on supply chains, on specific sectors. It is diffuse. It takes months to translate into prices that consumers actually feel. It creates corporate casualties before it creates household pain. The Sovereign Energy Premium skips every intermediary. It does not target an industry. It targets the foundational input of every industry. It does not create supply chain disruption that eventually reaches consumers. It routes directly from Canadian billing systems through American utility invoices to American household statements. There is no buffer. There is no absorption layer. There is no corporate entity with sufficient margin to absorb a 25% increase in electricity input costs. The utility companies operating in the 12 affected states run on regulated margins. When input costs increase, consumer prices increase. Automatically, mechanically, without negotiation, without delay. The premium is live as of this morning. The invoices hit American utility companies in 72 hours. The consumer bills arrive in 60 days. And on those bills, for the first time in American history, the cost of a presidential trade decision will appear as a named line item in every affected household's monthly electricity statement. Sovereign Energy Premium. That is the number. That is its name. And that name is going to do more political damage to this administration than any speech, any protest, any congressional hearing has managed to produce, because it will be in 68 million mailboxes every single month until the tariffs are removed. To understand how we arrived at this morning, we need to understand a phone call that happened 8 days ago. And we need to understand it not as a diplomatic failure, but as a triggering event, the moment one man gave another man exactly what he needed. The State Department had spent 2 weeks arranging the call between Trump and Carney. The premise was de-escalation. The talking points were measured, careful, designed to walk back months of tariff aggression and find a face-saving landing zone for both sides. Trump walked into that call and did something that sources in Ottawa described as the most economically illiterate thing a US president has said to a Canadian leader in the modern era. He made 3 demands. Demand 1, Canada sells its electricity to the United States at cost. 0 markup. 0 profit. Not a negotiated price, not a discounted price cost. He wanted Canadian taxpayers to subsidize the electricity bills of 68 million Americans because Donald Trump had decided, apparently, that Canadian resources exist for American benefit by some principle he did not articulate. Demand 2, Canada renegotiates every existing hydroelectric export contract at prices set by the U.S. Department of Energy, not by market rates, not by bilateral negotiation. Washington sets the price. A foreign government imposing price controls on the sovereign energy resources of an allied nation. Demand 3, Canada cancels all electricity export agreements with non-US buyers. No European contracts. No Asian contracts. Canadian surplus power flows south or it flows nowhere. He did not want to buy Canadian energy at a fair price. He wanted to own it. He wanted dams built with Canadian tax dollars, operated by Canadian workers, flowing through Canadian rivers to function as extensions of the American grid at American prices under American control. When Carney heard these demands, sources say the room went quiet. Not the quiet of shock. The quiet of a man whose preparation has just been validated. The quiet of someone who spent 6 months building a mechanism and just received confirmation that activating it was not only justified, but legally bulletproof. Carney's response was brief. Mr. President, Canada's energy resources are sovereign assets of the Canadian people. They are not for sale below market value. They are not subject to foreign price controls. Trump interrupted. He said, "You need us. You need us." To the leader of a country that supplies electricity to 68 million Americans. While those Americans were using Canadian electrons to power the hospitals, factories, transit systems, and kitchen appliances of 12 states. Carney said he appreciated the president's time and that Canada would communicate its position through appropriate channels. He hung up. 90 minutes later, he was in a secure briefing with the heads of Hydro-Quebec, Ontario Power Generation, BC Hydro, and Manitoba Hydro. He asked one question. Is the mechanism ready? The answer was yes. Now here is the detail that the mainstream coverage is not connecting at the level it deserves. The Trump administration was not caught off guard by the existence of Canadian energy leverage. They were caught off guard by their own decision to ignore documentation of it that landed on their desks 4 months ago. Here is that documentation. The Department of Energy's Office of Electricity completed a classified assessment titled the Cross-Border Energy Interdependency Vulnerability Analysis for Northern Grid-Connected States. 87 pages. Red cover sheet, the highest priority designation for infrastructure vulnerability reports. Sent to the National Security Advisor. Forwarded to the Presidential Briefing Team. Summarized verbally. The assessment's central finding: 12 U.S. states maintain critical dependency on Canadian hydroelectric imports. Vermont's dependency exceeds 30%. New York's Canadian imports constitute 19% of total supply. And here is the sentence that should have stopped every tariff conversation in its tracks. No domestic alternative can replace Canadian hydroelectric capacity within 24 months. 24 months. Not days, not weeks, 2 years. The assessment classified any trade policy action risking Canadian energy retaliation as a Tier 1 critical infrastructure threat. The same classification as a cyber attack on the power grid. The same classification as a natural disaster destroying transmission lines. The same classification as an act of war against American infrastructure. Tier 1. This document was in the White House. This warning was delivered. This classification was explicit. Trump's reported response, as relayed through the briefing chain: we've got coal. We've got natural gas. We don't need their water. Here is why those 7 words reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of how grids work. Natural gas plants are peaking generators. They're designed to handle demand spikes, the hottest afternoon of summer, the coldest morning of winter. They're not designed to run as baseload foundation power 24 hours a day. Running them continuously at baseload levels requires infrastructure modifications, fuel supply contract restructuring, and transmission upgrades. The timeline for that process is measured in months, not hours. Coal plants face the same structural constraint, compounded by the regulatory and physical reality that most northeastern coal infrastructure has been decommissioned over the past decade. You cannot replace the baseload foundation of 12 state grids in a political news cycle. The grid does not operate on a news cycle. It operates on physics. And physics, as Carney reportedly tells his staff, always wins. Make no mistake. This is a multi-front systemic event with consequences detonating simultaneously across 4 separate dimensions. Every front connects to every other. Every front makes the others worse. Front 1. The arithmetic front. What this costs specifically in your state. Wood Mackenzie, one of the most respected energy consultancies on Earth, published an emergency analysis this morning modeling the impact of a 25% sovereign energy premium. These are not projections. These are mechanical outputs of documented import dependency ratios applied to billing system architecture. New York State residential consumers, 18% increase within 2 billing cycles. Commercial and industrial users, 22% to 28%. The New York City metropolitan area, consuming approximately 11,000 megawatts at peak demand, faces an estimated $4.2 billion annual energy cost increase. $4.2 billion. Not a national figure. Not a state figure. One city. One city's subway system, hospital grid, commercial real estate portfolio, and residential buildings. Vermont, highest Canadian dependency in the nation. Residential electricity moving from an average of $120 per month to $157 per month. That is $444 per year per household. In a state with a median household income of $63,000, operating on already high electricity rates, that is not a rounding error. That is a crisis for families making budget decisions at the kitchen table. Michigan industrial electricity, 19% increase. The auto industry, already absorbing tariff costs on steel, on aluminum, on components, faces an additional $1.8 billion in annual energy costs. The per vehicle production cost increase, an estimated $340 per car. Not because raw materials got more expensive, because the power required to fabricate, weld, paint, and assemble that car got more expensive. Because electricity is the invisible input that every manufacturing process depends on and that nobody priced into the trade war calculation. Minnesota, 16% increase. Washington State, 14% increase. New Hampshire, 17% increase. Total annualized cost across all 12 states, $23.4 billion. Paid by American citizens. On monthly statements. Under a line item with a name. This is the annual price tag of demanding free electricity from a sovereign nation. Front 2, The market front. $67 billion before the opening bell. Money does not lie. It does not spin. It does not wait for a press briefing to decide what something is worth. Let's look at what money said this morning. The moment the directive hit the wire, the utility sector collapsed. Consolidated Edison, New York City, down 8.3% in pre-market trading. National Grid, Northeastern US, down 7.1%. DTE Energy, Michigan, down 6.8%. The entire U.S. utility sector erased $67 billion in market capitalization before most Americans had finished their first cup of coffee. The mechanism is straightforward. Utility companies cannot absorb a 25% input cost increase. They pass it to consumers. Consumers absorb higher electricity costs by reducing discretionary spending elsewhere. Restaurants, retail, travel, entertainment, all contract. Corporate earnings in consumer-facing sectors decline. Equity valuations follow earnings. S&P 500 futures down 2.8% before the open. Not because of a military conflict, not because of a financial institution failure, because of a 9-paragraph Canadian regulatory directive. Because the market understands systemic causation faster than any White House communications team. Canadian dollar, up 1.9% against USD. Gold, $3,150 per ounce. Safe haven assets accelerating. The market is pricing Canada as the structural winner of this exchange because Canada is the structural winner. Higher revenue per kilowatt hour. Stronger fiscal position. A mechanism that generates increasing returns the longer the tariffs remain in place. The market is also pricing something less tangible but equally consequential: uncertainty. When critical shared infrastructure becomes a geopolitical instrument, every assumption about continental economic stability that has been priced into North American assets for 50 years requires recalibration. That recalibration does not happen in one morning. It happens across weeks and months of portfolio adjustment. The $67 billion that evaporated before breakfast is the first installment. Front 3, the governance front. Governors with no good options. The governor of New York has declared a state energy emergency. She is in session right now with the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, the New York Independent System Operator, and representatives from every major utility company operating in the state. Sources inside that session described the atmosphere with one word: panic. Not because the lights are going out. The lights are not going out. Kearney is too sophisticated to cut the power. That would generate sympathy for Trump and position Canada as the aggressor. The lights stay on. They just become significantly more expensive. And there is nothing the governor can do about that in the short term. She cannot build a power plant in 72 hours. She cannot deploy grid-scale battery storage in a week. She cannot modify transmission infrastructure in a month. The Canadian electricity has been flowing through those lines for decades. The dependency is structural. The infrastructure that would allow alternatives does not exist at the required scale. Two options are on the table. First, emergency procurement of power from other U.S. states at premium prices. The problem: there is no surplus. Every state is consuming what it generates. The grid is balanced continent-wide. Surplus electricity does not sit in inventory. Second, emergency conservation measures. Dim public lighting. Reduce government building heat. Request voluntary consumption reductions from businesses. Rationing. In America. In 2026. The governor of Vermont is reportedly not in a public session. He is on the phone with Kearney's office. Not to protest, to ask for terms. Kearney's answer is 3 words: remove the tariffs. That is the entire price of resolution. Not a renegotiated framework. Not a bilateral summit. Not a years-long diplomatic process. The tariffs go down. The premium goes down, proportionally, the same day. The simplicity of the solution is itself an indictment. The administration has no one to blame, no complexity to hide behind, no institutional process to cite as a reason for delay. The ask is precisely as simple as the harm it would undo. Front 4. The Alliance Architecture Front. What every watching Capital is recording. Every allied government on Earth is watching this week's events and running the same calculation. What does this administration do when a partner pushes back with real consequences? The answer being written this week will shape every bilateral negotiation, every alliance commitment, every security arrangement involving the United States for years. Canada is a NATO ally, a G7 partner, a Five Eyes intelligence sharing nation, the country with which the United States shares the longest peaceful border in human history. If this administration cannot maintain a functional trade relationship with Canada, if it responds to Canadian pushback by escalating rather than negotiating, every other allied government adjusts its assessment of American reliability accordingly. NATO commitments become less credible. Security guarantees become less bankable. The invisible infrastructure of American global leadership, the network of relationships, agreements, and shared interests built over 70 years, erodes at a rate that does not appear on any balance sheet but accumulates in every capital simultaneously. Watch how the response is distributing across every affected constituency in real time. In Republican caucuses from Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and New York, the political calculation is visible and uncomfortable. These elected officials have supported the tariff strategy publicly. They will now receive constituent calls about electricity bills that are 15 to 30% higher. Those two facts cannot coexist indefinitely. Watch for private White House communications that diverge from public statements. Watch for procedural votes on tariff authorization that suddenly attract unexpected Republican opposition. The billing cycle does not care about message discipline. In the manufacturing sector, the breaking point may have arrived. The National Association of Manufacturers, the Chamber of Commerce, every auto industry association had built tariff costs into their projections. They had modeled steel costs. They had modeled aluminum costs. They had not modeled a $1.8 billion Michigan energy cost increase because nobody scenario planned the invisible input. The sector that has absorbed the most tariff pain is now absorbing an additional layer of pain it did not prepare for. Watch for formal demands on the administration, not suggestions, demands, to resolve the Canadian energy situation as a precondition for continued manufacturing investment in affected states. In Canada, the reaction is the one this administration has encountered least often from any quarter: calm confidence. The mechanism activated exactly as designed. The provincial operators coordinated without incident. The legal framework is solid. 6 months of review ensures it. Carney is, by all accounts, exactly where he expected to be when he started building this 6 months ago. He is waiting. The machine runs on its own now. Here is the strategic insight that Trump's team missed, and understanding it explains everything about why they walked into this trap without seeing it. Trump thinks in photographs, not metaphorically, literally. His entire political framework is built around images that can be captured, broadcast, and responded to. The closed factory, the stopped truck at the border, the tariff announcement with a number in it. These are visible. They produce visible reactions. The enemy responds visibly. The battle is fought on terrain that everyone can see. Carney thought in spreadsheets. He thought in billing cycles, dependency ratios, transmission capacity tables, provincial revenue projections, WTO dispute timelines. He thought in the invisible infrastructure of economic systems, the layer below the visible layer that makes the visible layer possible. Trump tariffed things you can see: steel beams, lumber planks, dairy products. Carney priced the thing you cannot see: the electricity that makes the machines that make the things. And here is the asymmetry that makes the trap inescapable. Trump's tariff weapons work on things that have alternatives. You can find steel from another country. You can find lumber from another source. You can buy dairy from domestic producers. The supply chain adjusts. It's painful, but it adjusts. There is no alternative source for the baseload hydroelectric power that 12 states have been importing from Canada for 50 years. You cannot find it on another continent. You cannot generate it domestically in a timeline that matters. The DOE said so explicitly: 24 months minimum to develop meaningful alternatives. 24 months of billing cycles at elevated rates. Carney reportedly told his staff, "You don't fight a man who punches. You fight the floor." He built the floor. Every escalation option Trump has makes the floor tell further. Sever the transmission lines, his own voters in Michigan and Wisconsin lose power. Invade Canada, the Joint Chiefs resign. Sanction Hydro Quebec, you're sanctioning the province of Quebec. A democratic government, a constitutional impossibility with catastrophic diplomatic consequences. The trap has no exit that doesn't require removing the tariffs. That is the only door. Carney built the only door. Here's what to watch, specifically with timelines in the coming days and weeks. Scenario 1. The billing cycle breaks the stalemate. The first consumer bills arrive in 60 days. Before that, utility companies in affected states file emergency rate adjustment requests with state public utility commissions. Those filings become public. They generate local news coverage. They produce the first visible documentation of the premium's consumer impact. Watch for those filings in the next 2 weeks. They are the early warning system for the political pressure that follows. At the point where Republican senators from Michigan, New York, and Wisconsin are facing constituent electricity bills in the mail and local TV coverage of utility rate increases, the private White House pressure to find a tariff off-ramp becomes impossible to ignore. The current administration has demonstrated one consistent behavior pattern. It retreats from visible, sustained, financially painful opposition. The Super Bowl cancellation, the icy stadium reversal, the gerrymandering retreat. The billing cycle is about to make the pain visible in 68 million mailboxes simultaneously. Scenario 2. Trump escalates and the premium escalates with him. This is Carney's preferred scenario in the sense that it accelerates the political cost curve. Every additional tariff Trump imposes produces an automatic, proportional increase in the sovereign energy premium. The mechanism requires no decisions, no statements, no diplomatic communications from Canada. It runs. At 50% tariffs, Vermont's electricity is 50% more expensive. At 100%, it doubles. At that level, the political cost in affected states is not a governing challenge. It is an existential electoral threat to every Republican holding office there. Scenario 3. The WTO challenge that changes nothing. The administration files a WTO challenge against the Canada Energy Security Act. Carney's legal team spent 6 months making this the weakest available attack surface. The statutory language is carefully constructed to meet established WTO exception criteria for national security and critical infrastructure measures. WTO dispute resolution takes years. The premium runs the entire time. American households receive elevated bills every 60 days while lawyers exchange briefs in Geneva. The pattern is clear. The pattern has been clear across every confrontation this administration has entered. Visible pressure, sustained over time, with direct financial consequences for American citizens, produces retreat. Carney didn't build a weapon. He built a billing cycle. And billing cycles run forever until someone makes a decision. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Because in 72 hours, the first invoices hit American utility companies. In 14 days, the first public utility rate filing documents the cost. In 60 days, the first consumer bills arrive. And at every one of those milestones, we will be here with the numbers, the filings, the emergency session updates, and the White House response, or the White House silence, which tells its own story. Watch Michigan. Watch New York. Watch Vermont. Watch whether any Republican senator from an affected state breaks with the tariff strategy before the bills arrive in constituent mailboxes. The sequence matters. Before the bills, courage. After the bills, survival instinct. A former central banker spent 6 months building a machine in silence, while the most powerful government on earth held rallies about steel and lumber. He built the machine out of the one thing the administration forgot to protect. The invisible thing. The thing beneath everything. The thing that runs through the walls of every home in 12 states and powers the economy of $6.2 trillion. He built it out of electricity. And in 60 days, 68 million Americans will open a bill that shows them, for the first time, in dollars and cents, with a name, exactly what it costs to forget about the invisible things. Sovereign Energy Premium. That is the number. That is its name. and it runs every month until the tariffs come down. There is a number that does not yet exist.